Welcome to the Terrible Podcast with your hosts from SteelersDepot.com, where you can find all your latest and greatest Steelers news. It's Dave Bryan and Alex Kozora, always lit, talking Steelers. And now, here's Dave and Alex.
Welcome to the Terrible Podcast, Season 13, Episode 109. He's Dave Bryan. I'm Alex Kozora, SteelersDepot.com. Thanks for being back with us here this Monday, Steelers Nation. Dave, how you doing? How was your weekend?
We made it to April, and we made it through April Fools and all like that. So that means the pro day circuit, winding down and all like that. A lot of good sports on. Enjoyed a couple of those. Especially those ladies' Final Four basketball games. They were quite entertaining there. So interesting week coming up as we start getting closer to the draft. And I think we're going to have, a roundtable podcast, hopefully close out this week with that on Friday. And we got a live stream tonight. So a lot still happening here moving forward.
Hopefully we'll be better than the refs were in that national title game for the women's championship between LSU and Iowa, because they were, in two words, not good. Not good at all. Yeah, they made it more about them than they probably needed to. But overall, like I said, that Iowa game the other night, as part of the Final Four was very entertaining. And then it looked like LSU was going to really, really handle Iowa, and they did ultimately, but Iowa made it close there in, I don't know about halfway through the third quarter and a little bit into the fourth there before Iowa was just too strong. But once again, it was an entertaining weekend of sports, and the Penguins, won their game against the Flyers last night. So that was fun to watch as well. And the Pirates, they're there too. They're hanging around. 1 and 2.
And the Pirates.
All right, Dave, let's get into some Steelers talk. Not really anything major happening over the weekend, so this is just kind of more discussion and just us kind of talking through it here on a Monday. I did want to kick off the week, though, with essentially the pro day season concluding. I believe Montana State is in a couple of days, and there are going to be individual workouts held for some injured players, including Devon Witherspoon, Miles Murphy, guys like that. But the actual school pro days are essentially done. So I wanted to tabulate all the tracking that we did and all the Steelers spotting that we went through over the last month of March, and just to see what the results were, the final numbers ended up being. And so that article is sticky to the top of the page on Steelers Depot. Officially, Mike Tomlin and Omar Khan went to 7 pro days this year altogether. Clemson, Georgia, Michigan, Iowa, Iowa State, Ohio State, Alabama. I know we recapped that on, I think it was Friday's podcast there. So I think what's interesting here is the coordinators, positional coaches, where those guys were at, and I have that tabulated as well. Leading the way is Pat Meyer with 5 stops: Northwestern, Ohio State, Alabama, NC State, and Tennessee. Terrell Austin, defensive coordinator, was at 4: Clemson, Georgia, Iowa State, and Penn State. So I'm not sure if you got a chance to look at the actual article yet, but just from all your tracking and kind of what you followed along, do you have any overall takeaways on what Pittsburgh did or did not do during this pro day cycle?
First and foremost, I thought maybe we'd see Tomlin and Khan at maybe 1 or 2 more pro days than what we saw them at. What was it? 7, I think, in total there. I was kind of thinking maybe they'd show up to, Tennessee and maybe a couple more in there. But I mean, I didn't gasp or anything like that. I think
the league meetings probably hampered some of those travels.
And shame on them for, at least some of these pro days. Can't you have a little pause there and run them maybe into this week of April or something like that? There's got to be a better way around those, because it's not or
just put the league meetings this week when they're done. Yeah. Like, why would you? The league meetings don't have to take place in mid-March.
Let's see. Maybe a bit shocking that we didn't spot Matt Canada at all. I didn't expect to see him out there a lot, but not seeing him at all. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean he wasn't because sometimes he's a tough one to. I think going back to last year, he's a tough one to kind of pick out in certain instances. But we feel fairly confident that he wasn't at any of at least the major ones there. Not shocking that Pat Meyer, was spotted at several of these. I thought maybe we'd see him maybe at one or two more than we did. Carl Dunbar, I really thought we would have seen him at maybe at like the Florida pro day and maybe the Wisconsin one or something along those lines there. But obviously we didn't. See if anything else. Frisman Jackson, I kind of envisioned seeing him one or two more times than what we ultimately did. But once again, it's not like, we might go back through this over the next week, trying to spot check some pictures that may have surfaced in some of these pro days. And inevitably we add like two or three, spottings to this thing moving forward. So maybe a position coach will be in there.
Yeah, this list, just to be clear, is not 100% exhaustive. I'm sure we're missing something, although I like to think no one has a list like this aside from actual NFL teams. We ended up spotting the Steelers at 85 total pro days this year. We have names for 83. That's better than our numbers last year, which sat in the 70s. So I think we're about as thorough as two guys on the internet can possibly be. Let me just ask you, does it mean anything to you that offensive line coach Pat Meyer was at 5 stops and essentially, to our knowledge, Matt Canada did not go anywhere? And for reference, he was at 5 last year, all the top quarterbacks, in 3 in 2021. Frisman Jackson not being anywhere besides Pitt, again, that we're aware of. Does that even signify more an offensive line-minded approach to the draft, or is this kind of just noise?
No, I think you have to take this into consideration here. And what does it mean about Grady Brown, us not spotting him at more places here? I do think. Everybody would agree listening to this that this team's probably going to draft an offensive lineman sooner rather than later. And with the way some of these pre-draft visits have been shaping up with some of these center capable guys, it probably won't be a shock if they take 2 offensive linemen in this draft as well too, with one of them potentially being a center based on what they did during free agency there. So the thing to read into it is, we have spotted Pat Meyer at a lot of places here. So, and especially the places that they have spotted him, were where there were reputable, top of the draft kind of players here.
Yeah, and I would say 5 trips for a positional coach. I know a couple of them that would have been Ohio State and Alabama were alongside Tomlin and Kahn. He was at Northwestern, NC State, and Tennessee, basically flying solo. That is about the max you're going to see for a positional coach. That was more than any positional coach last year. So I think generally, if you have positional coaches 2 to 3 to 4 places, that's pretty notable. Wouldn't expect the guy to be at 6 or 7. If you're at 0 or 1, that's pretty notable as well. So that's the way that I view things. I think it is interesting to see Meyer so heavily represented and not really seeing much from the skill position groups with the running backs coach, wide receivers coach, OC, which is kind of the pass game coordinator in Pittsburgh. And then defensively, I think you saw, pretty good travels for those guys with Austin and, Carl Dunbar and Grady Brown, Aaron Curry. So I think those guys were pretty well represented overall.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out the reason behind the North Carolina State. I guess that Zavala, right? Is he? I haven't watched anything on him. Is he going to be center capable?
He was primarily a guard. They have another NC State guy, Grant Gibson, that mostly played in the middle. You could probably try to put him at center if you wanted to try to increase that versatility. I'm not entirely sure on his background if he has played a bit of center in the past or not. I think he's primarily viewed as a guard guy, but provided you're not too incredibly tall, then you can probably try to kick the center if a team really wanted you to.
Okay, yeah, that was one. He was the Fairmont State kid too, wasn't he?
Yeah, he had transferred up from Fairmont State to NC State. I will say, for whatever it's worth, Pat Meyer coached at NC State for quite some time. So maybe that's a little bit of a homecoming, knew some people there. And maybe that was one reason why he decided to make that stop.
Okay. I think of all the places that Meyer was spotted, that might have been the most head scratcher.
Yeah, that was probably the most curious one, the one that you would not have expected. But because a guy like him, what was the name? Zavazala? Am I saying that incorrectly? Probably.
Zavala. Yeah.
He was not that combine invite. He was one of the biggest snubs. And so you didn't get to watch him work out at Indy. And so you probably want to send a coach there if you're really interested in that guy, because you want to see that guy actually work out in person.
Okay.
And talk to him as well. So that makes, I think, sense overall. What do you make, and this is maybe a little tinfoil hat of me here, Dave, on a Monday, Danny Smith being at 2 pro days? I know it's only 2, but usually that guy doesn't get out to a bunch of pro days. He was at Clemson in Georgia. They both have kickers that are draft eligible. Last time he was at 2 pro days, at least 2 pro days, was 2021, and that was for 2 punters in Max Stuffy and Presley Harvin. And of course, Harvin became a draft pick. So does this mean anything, just given that Chris Boswell was a bit injured last year, not his best season, the fact that Danny Smith's going to some pro days that have a couple of top kickers?
Man, unless they do some wheeling and dealing and pick up a couple extra late round picks here, I sure do I know that they're not going to draft a kicker? I mean, I would certainly hope that they wouldn't. I view this as more of, potentially bringing one of these, maybe one of those 2 guys in as undrafted free agents, because they do need somebody in camp to probably alleviate some of the wear and tear on Boswell. But unless Boswell's got something chronic going on or something that we don't know about, then I would be shocked that I hope they don't draft a kicker, after spending, we've seen this team before spend a 6-round draft pick on a long snapper. Obviously Harvin, which a good thing he's stuck, but at least for now. But yeah, bring some of the, if you want somebody to push Boswell, assuming this isn't injury related, just sign an undrafted free agent.
I think that's the more likely path right now than actually drafting one, although I can't rule it out, as crazy it may sound, just based on the evidence that I'm looking at right now. But even still, even if it is an undrafted guy, to have your coordinator go out and check those guys out is, to me, at least a little notable, because you don't have to go send your special teams coordinator to go bring in an undrafted kicker if he's only there basically for the summer to preserve Boswell's leg. So I don't know. My antenna's gone up just a little bit on that one.
No chance he's looking at the long snappers from either of those schools, right?
Do they have any? I'm not entirely sure. Shame on me for not knowing the long snapping of Clemson and Georgia. I know the top long snapper in the draft is from Central Florida, so that's where my knowledge kind of starts and ends. But I'll have to check. Anyway, I just know both those schools. I think Clemson, it's what's his name, BT Potter, and I think Georgia has one as well. The top kicker, it's not one of those guys, so it's not like they're looking at the Maryland kid or I think the kid from Michigan, but just want to note that still because it did catch my attention.
Okay.
And then from the scouting department, Dan Rooney, a busy man, Dan Rooney Jr., I should say, 10 pro days, 7 for Mark Sadowski. I'm really watching where Mark Sadowski has been, because I know Omar Khan talked about that Andy Weidel sets the board, but Sadowski and Sheldon White, and I believe Dan Colbert, help kind of create the information that will create the board for Andy Weidel. And Sadowski really was kind of all over the U.S. this year. He wasn't really in a zone or a region, which basically every other front office guy was. Sadowski was at Northwestern, UCLA, USC, Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Florida State. So we're getting West Coast, we're getting South, Southeast, we're getting the random Northwestern one. I mean, this guy was kind of all over the map.
Yeah, I don't know. This will be one of the things that we look back at, right? Especially with having a new general manager and all, to see if we can, if any of these Blues clues mean anything. And then once again, people are saying, well, I heard, Mike Tomlin say, trying to play some gamemanship this year. We'll see. when it comes to where they went and where the first round pick obviously comes out of and that kind of stuff there. But I don't know if we can read into too much more stuff, especially when it comes to Sadowski and I think you wrote up that you expected to see Casey Weidel maybe a few more places than we did.
Yeah, and maybe that's just faulty thinking from my part, but only 3, and they were all very local. Duquesne, which basically was kind of the PSAC local pro day, it felt like, West Virginia, and Shepherd. So really just a driving distance to all 3 of those places on Weidel. I know I'd asked you, I think, last week about Andy Weidel, but him being at 1, maybe 2 if he was at Pitt, but 1 he actually had to travel to, that was Penn State. Does that surprise you that, Weidel with the scouting background really seemed to be, to our knowledge, awfully limited on the pro day trail?
I thought we might see him out a little bit more, but somebody's got to man the phones, I guess. I don't know what to think about that. I did have a question though about Dan Rooney Jr. What's the correlation been with him over the years and maybe potential first round picks?
I hadn't really studied it too closely. I don't really believe there is one. He's often with Tomlin and Colbert, and this year Omar Khan Rooney was at places like Clemson, Ohio State, Alabama, and then was kind of doing some East Coast type stuff, the Carolinas. I don't really necessarily see much of a correlation in terms of predicting who they'll take based on Rooney Jr.'s travels. And
based off of that kind of that first round candidate list that we built, sort of went through on Friday there. I mean, the only one really that has the asterisk next to it and it's explainable would be the Penn State one.
Right. And then you see Joey Porter Jr. come in for a visit, which is probably because Tomlin/Khan could not make it after that Penn State Pro Day with the league meetings still going on. And again, I think the whole Pro Day schedule sucks. I think just in the way they jam-pack this thing into a month, the way they put the league meetings over top, free agency, I just think it's a total mess, but that's a whole rant for a different day. If you haven't looked at the post yet, what scout do you think we saw the most? What area scout do you think we saw the most this entire cycle, Dave?
Oh, man, Yellow Hat Gorsuch.
Yellow Hat Gorsuch. He's like our Curious George, the man in the yellow hat. Mark Gorsuch, 12 schools we saw him, but that yellow hat makes it easy.
It sure does. And then, I mean, I know me personally, I was able to pick out Mike Butler and Kelvin Fisher quite easily.
Yeah, and I'm pretty good at spotting Phil Kreidler. So Kreidler was, again, to our knowledge, is probably more here, but from what we've tracked, 12 for Gorsuch, 10 for Kreidler, 10 for Fisher, 8 for Mike Butler. And so those were the leaders. And in terms of what do we take away from the area scouts, not much, because they have regions they're going to see these guys because it's in large part due to their region. Occasionally for some smaller schools and guys where, okay, Mike Butler goes to Princeton. He's going there to see Andre Yosevos because there really aren't a lot of other Princeton prospects. So you take some note there, but those are regions and the regions have changed and we won't get into all those details right now. But aside from the areas kind of changing, it's not a ton to take away from here.
Okay.
So that is the Pro Day post. I do want to mention as well, I think actually one thing that kind of has happened over the last couple of days, especially Friday, we know several more visitors that are coming in or have had visits with the Pittsburgh Steelers, those top 30 pre-draft visits. And I don't believe we talked about them before. If not, then I apologize if I'm repeating myself. But new names to that list include Purdue wide receiver Charlie Jones, North Dakota State offensive lineman Cody Mock, Wisconsin defensive lineman Keanu Benton, and Kansas State cornerback Julius Brent. So, Dave, your thoughts on these new names that have been reported to the Steelers pre-draft visit list?
And did we have did we talk about the wide receiver out of Ole Miss?
We did talk about Jonathan Mingo a little bit. Yeah.
Look, I mean, it looks like, wide receiver at some point, once again, there's going to be a wide receiver in this class. I think that's a takeaway for sure at this point. And it was good to see. I mean, I think that kind of backs up with Benton coming in that he does match, at least they wanted to get talk to him a little bit more, and probably matches up the fact that Dunbar didn't make it out that way.
Right.
So that adds up. I wasn't shocked to see his name on the list. Cody Mock, you probably want to bring that guy in for obvious reasons because he's so versatile and B, I mean, you could really see him, potentially being a Pittsburgh Steeler if they didn't get a lineman early, kind of a mid round move around. And look, potentially, we don't know how much center he has in his background, which I don't think is much, but he did show at the Senior Bowl that he could move around and play all those positions. Now, I don't think they would obviously look at him as a tackle, more as an interior guy, but it brought a smile to my face that they brought him in. Do I think from where I sit right now he'll ultimately be a draft pick? No, but I don't think you can discount him either because he was brought in.
Oh, yeah, you certainly can't discount it because you're getting that top 30 visit. And he's a guy I wrestled with because I think they do like him a lot. I mean, he was the guy that was primarily a tackle, left tackle in college, and throughout this pre-draft process, teams have tried to make him versatile by playing him at guard, playing him at center, all those things he did at the Senior Bowl. But it's a big learning curve for him because it's all pretty new to him. But he is physical. He is nasty. He does have good size. Doesn't have great length. I don't know where Pittsburgh might best view him as a guard when you already have a bunch of guards. Maybe try him at center. He doesn't have that length in the overall frame that Pittsburgh's looking at in tackles when it comes to him versus Darnell Wright and Dawan Jones and names like that. But I do think they really like this guy. Dan Colbert was at his pro day last week, and so I think that's pretty notable to me. I kind of want to mock this guy to the Steelers, but I just don't know where he would fit. I would put him either at 32 or 49. That would be the range for him if I was putting him in a mock draft. But I think in terms of if he was the pick, where do they envision playing him? How do they envision getting him on the field early? If you're an offensive lineman drafted high, generally speaking, you're going to be playing right away. I'm struggling with that.
Well, I'm struggling too with some of these, potential. It's one of the things, if it's a top, first or second round guy, how do you go about getting that guy on the field?
Right. That's what I'm saying. Where would you play a Cody Mock in year one if you draft him, let's say at 32?
Right. Especially with all the action that you've had during the free agency with the guard position specifically. And then, I mean, look, if you thought of him maybe as a center candidate, I mean, he just doesn't have, it would be more of a process with him, I would think, to get him on the field if you envision him being a true center.
Yeah, unless the team says, hey, we're comfortable him sitting for a year. He is coming from a smaller school. Now, North Dakota State's an FCS powerhouse, but it still is going to be a jump. And, we're going to be okay because of the investments we put in the offensive line, and we're going to add depth, and we're going to protect ourselves against injury to every single degree. I mean, you could argue that point, but obviously, generally speaking, in Pittsburgh and across the NFL, your first, second round pick, you're getting on the field sooner than later. Mm-hmm. But he could be that literal chess piece across all five positions if he wanted him to play tackle, play center, play guard. That might be the idea as this, ultimate, versatile guy out of the gate. And again, he's not played a lot of interior football overall, but you could try to train and work on him the way that he's been kind of asked to do that during this pre-draft process.
And look, he just might end up being a guy they like and want to get to know more about, that potentially 4 years, 5 years, I guess it'd be 5. How many years? Because he's probably not going to be a first round draft pick. So he'd have a 4-year deal. So I guess 5 years from now in free agency that potentially they look at.
Yeah, there's a lot of value in that. And you see Pittsburgh in this, year being no exception in terms of circling back to some of those names like Keanu Neal, the latest and good example of that. So you have Mock, Benton, again, as you said, happy to see, not surprised to see. It's the guy that makes a lot of sense. We've been talking about Keanu Benton since basically the offseason began. Charlie Jones, I know less about Charlie Jones than maybe you do or some other people do. Outside receiver, transfer, went to 3 different schools, a little bit light. Decent athlete, not super.
Maybe a later round undrafted guy.
Okay, it feels like he's going to get drafted, though the receivers can be tough to tell. I don't know exactly where he's going to go. I can try to see where mock draft database has him so kind of aggregated, and that's no guarantee. But I'll just see where they have him. They have him 5th round right now is kind of their overall, and that's just based on aggregate mock drafts being done around the internet. So that's Charlie Jones. And then Julius Brents, another big, long corner. We've talked about him as well, a bit grabby, but, physical, long, man cover corner, really good Senior Bowl week. Doesn't have that long speed, but, that's a guy that has a rare frame for the position.
Okay. I know we'll have more talks about him, I'm sure, in the pre-draft roundtable, because I think guys like Owen and Tyler Wise, have been talking him up for a while.
Yeah, definitely. Just to kind of bounce off that in terms of the receiver conversation, I want to focus maybe a little less on the slot receiver discussion that we had last week, because I think we've kind of said all that can be said about that right now. But just where do you think this team would draft a receiver? Is it early? Is it later? Because there is a need there, especially in the slot. But when you see Frisman Jackson seemingly not going to these pro days, you're not quite sure how they feel about the slot position and just the receiver room overall. You think it's earlier, later? Is it hard to say? Where do you come in, Dave?
I think anywhere from the third round and on, I think opens up the possibility.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think they have to add, at least in the slot, just because you can't hand Calvin Austin anything. Even if you have confidence in the guy, you just can't assume that he's going to be the guy next year. And
they might be looking for more versatile, than anything. Maybe a guy that does have a little bit of slot in his background in college, but maybe some X and some Z on top of it there. So I don't think it will be surprising. After we look at it, let's say they do draft a wide receiver, to say, oh, okay, well, this guy played maybe primarily X, but he did see some time in the slot. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah. They want guys who are versatile because, guys in this Steelers system move around quite a bit. So you don't want somebody who can only do one thing, or at least isn't capable of being able to move around, doesn't have a skill set that will allow him to move around. So, yeah, that's going to be important.
I'm willing to bet if they do draft a wide receiver, though, that somewhere through us looking deeper into that player in the film rooms and the statistical look, that player will have some contested catches, a nice percentage of contested catches in college, and yards after the catch, and probably a decent short shuttle time, right? Isn't that one of the things that they tend to rank highly in your what they look for portion?
I'll have to go back and check the numbers, and just finding a guy that does a short shuttle in a 3-cone is like a unicorn, especially at the combine. A lot of guys do them at their pro day, and I'll probably have to adjust how I view those numbers going forward, because one does them.
Have you only used combine numbers in the past, or have you used pro day numbers as well too?
Yeah, my intent was to use combine numbers for the time drills. And so because the pro day numbers, that number that you see, whose number is that? It's all hand time. So there's no official pro day number. Generally, the school puts something out, but again, where does that come from? It's all hand time. And so for pro days, I would allow things that are objectively measurable, like a vertical jump, 37 inches is 37 inches, broad jump, bench press, things like that. I would only use the combine time for 40-yard dash, for short shuttle, 3-cone. But I think at this point, given how many players are opting out of those drills, they may have to change courses. Otherwise, a lot of guys won't qualify simply because they didn't participate in that drill.
Okay.
That again, those studies are coming. I wanted to let the whole pro day cycle wind down. So probably maybe by early next week, start pumping out those what they look for articles for 2023.
Okay. Does Math Bomb start filtering in pro day stuff in, or does he go entirely off of combine? In other words, after the fact, does he filter in if a player didn't run at the combine?
I think he does. I don't know if he updates numbers if times are better at their combine compared to their pro day. I'm not sure how he handles that.
Okay. That's
a good question overall. Anyway, so yeah, I think
unfortunately, I think that's the world we're going to live in now. Right. And we talked about this after the combine too. It feels like the trends. I think you're going to see more and more of these kids not do their maybe primarily because of the way they had this laid out with the schedule and all now. you're going to see less of them do the 3-cone and the 20-yard shuttle at the combine now.
Yeah, I think you're definitely seeing that. And again, my hesitation for not using the pro day times in the past was A, they're often friendlier for the players, faster than what they would have been at the combine. And B, you're just never quite sure who has that number because they are hand timed. And so they can be a bit more subjective than what you would say an NFL combine objective number for that may be. But I think I will have to change for this year.
Okay.
So speaking of the slot, talk about slot receiver. I had an article yesterday, Dave, about who is this team's slot corner going to be. Again, we've kind of touched on that in the past, but really wanted to flesh out that thought in a post on Sunday. As of right now, I'm not sure. I mean, there are some options. There are some names. Certainly the draft has names available to Pittsburgh, but it's one of those big questions that no one really talks about that much, but it is critical to the Steelers defense figuring out who's going to be their slot corner.
Yeah, and that's something I think we're going to have to wait and to see what happens, obviously, for the rest of free agency, although anybody that they bring in free agency at this point, I know AJ wrote an article about this last night, I think. Anybody they bring in at this point, you wouldn't probably view as a huge upgrade over Arthur Millette, right? In free agency?
It would be somebody that wouldn't be guaranteed to make the team. They may be better in coverage because Millette really struggles there. As you know, Millette's a very niche rundown, Mike Hilton in terms of the aggressiveness and kind of, big dog mentality.
All right. So the thing too about adding another cornerback, when you look at the guys they have under contract right now, I mean, you got what? Patrick Peterson, obviously. You got Levi Wallace. Akella Witherspoon still on the roster. Obviously, Arthur Millette. You brought back James Pierre, who's more of obviously bottom of the depth chart special teams guy. Who else beyond that?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the slot guys, the names that you could try to theorize right now, Millette has that role. Trey Norwood, disappointing 2022 season, but he's a guy that this team has tried to do that in the past. Could DeMonte Casey do it? He really hasn't done it much in his career, but if you want to throw out names, you can throw out names. Again, the draft certainly has those options available to you, but, we've been focused so much on, will they draft Joey Porter Jr. or Deonte Banks or Julius Brents or somebody like that? If you draft one of those guys, those are all outside corners. And so how does your slot package look? Is a Wallace going to bump inside Peterson? Really, those guys have not done much, if at all, inside work at the NFL level. And here's my extra concern, because one answer I got was the Steelers, Alex, they will figure it out. And they're aware of the problem, and I'm sure they're aware of it. But you just have to go back to 2021, where Mike Hilton leads for the Bengals. They cut Steven Nelson. They bumped Cam Sutton outside. They went into camp in 21 with basically, it was a competition between Arthur Millette and Antoine Brooks Jr. for that slot position, and it really never worked out well. They didn't really have a good plan for it. They kind of rolled through a bunch of different names. Guys got injured. They tried Minkah Fitzpatrick to play in the slot the first 2 weeks of that year, got burned by the Raiders. He was not comfortable there. They shift him back, and ultimately they kind of did a split committee of Millette and Cam Sutton. Cam Sutton was like he was the flex tape meme guy where just you had a problem in the secondary, you just put Cam Sutton on it because he could do everything. And now no longer is Cam Sutton an option for the Steelers defense. And so my concern is we're going to get a repeat of 2021 where they go into the camp saying, really don't have a great plan for how we're going to deal with the slot corner position.
And remember all the talk right ahead of training camp that year about Antoine Brooks Jr. And then he started off camp injured and was like out the door.
Yeah, and did finish the season with the team. I mean, there was a serious conversation we were talking about, is Brooks Jr. going to be the slot corner? And obviously he wasn't. And it became, they really did not have a coherent plan when they lost, Hilton and cut Nelson. And Sutton ended up kind of fixing that, but now Sutton's not here to fix it anymore. Right.
And you're probably not going to draft a slot guy in the first 2 picks, right? Or no?
Probably not. Maybe, starting at 49. And will they draft what pure kind of slot corner have they shown interest in? There really hasn't been one. Now they could still draft somebody, Clark Phillips, Keetro Clark, Owen. We'll talk about that more probably on Friday's show. But We just haven't heard those names too much.
Right. And what about the other Antonio Johnson kid out of Iowa State?
Yeah, that is one name that we have heard. Now, is he like a true slot, or is he kind of like a big nickel who can kind of play safety, kind of almost that Brooks Jr. type mold, or is he kind of more of a cover guy?
To be determined, I think, really, because he did, this last year I would view him more as a kind of a big nickel guy, at least what I've seen of him so far, a candidate for that, because he did play a lot of obviously cornerback before moving to safety this past year. And I think that's where he's kind of helped his stock, is that he showed he could play more, can be that physical guy down in the box. And then if you needed him to, cover, a tight end or something like that.
Okay. Yeah. I'm trying to think any other names in terms of slot options, what that guy could be. Just not 100%. And I think it's a really big issue for this team that really has not gotten much attention. The outside corner has to be looked at too, to add some youth, add some speed. Guys who are not under contract for next year, that's certainly a concern as well. I think cornerback is still pretty messy looking in Pittsburgh right now.
Yeah, where does Ringo fit in best?
He's an outside guy. Some people have thought he might move to free safety because he's a bit tight. So he's certainly not a slot option.
Right.
And then you got strong safety discussions. There's still, I think, a lot of.
I guess it rolls back into some of the branch discussions.
Yeah, I think you kind of circle back to him as somebody that can kind of be that versatile guy. And again, had the conversation about where exactly does he fit, what's his best role. But Brian Branch, certainly a name to consider at 17.
Could he be a 32 guy? Do you think he's? I think he's still on the board at 32. Could he be a 32 guy?
Yeah, he could. I don't want to sit there and say he can't because he didn't test off the charts. But I mean, I don't know, the head and shoulders best safety in this draft. There's a big drop off after him. I feel like some team's going to get desperate and take him somewhere in the 20s.
Okay.
But I don't know. I mean, he could. It would not shock me.
Okay.
All right. What else do we have here, Dave? I know that you had an article on Saturday. No fifth-year option decision this year for Pittsburgh.
Real quick, while we're talking about cornerbacks here, I started looking. Someone had asked me somewhere, maybe on Twitter, if I was worried about Joey Porter and his production as far as interceptions and all in college went. And I went down a rabbit hole, thinking, okay, let's go back and look at some first round cornerbacks dating back to how far did I go back? 2013 that came out of college with a reasonably low amount of interceptions, and particularly I was trying to look to see if I could find anybody with 1 or 0. But when I got to one certain name here, I sort of stopped, and it's because that one name was, hold on here. The Florida State kid, Ramsey.
Oh, Jalen Ramsey.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He had, I think, only three interceptions coming out. Let me see, where was that link at that I had here? Okay, here it is. Yeah. Let me look at his college stats and game played real quick here. He played 3 seasons at Florida State, a total of 28, 38, 41 games, and he had 3 interceptions coming out of college and 0 in his final year at Florida State. So if memory serves me, wasn't there some discussion saying, well, where's the production? And look, I know we've had this conversation in the past when it comes to Devin Bush and all like that, but obviously probably Ramsey like Porter, at least these last couple of years, probably wasn't targeted as much, So I guess the question is how concerned are you overall with the lack of interceptions, plain and simple, for a guy like Joey Porter coming out. And once again, this might have been a bigger deal. Maybe I was envisioning maybe writing up a post about this, but once I hit Jalen Ramsey and him having just 3 total interceptions in all those games at Florida State and 0 in his last year at Florida State, I figured out. I just figured at that point it's not worth pursuing.
Yeah, I forget. There was some position changes I think Ramsey had in college. I forget the whole backstory there, but am I concerned? It's something notable. It's something to consider. I don't know if I have a good answer right now about why his interception production was low. If it was a lack of targets, I don't have those numbers in front of me. I think it matters a bit more for Pittsburgh because they have been so, ball hawk focused in terms of they want guys who can make plays and take the football away, not just break up passes. And so that may ding Porter some, but I still view him as certainly in contention for Pittsburgh despite that 1 career interception.
Right. And that's where I'm going with this. I don't think, unless they put a lot of emphasis on, and once again, you'd have to go back and look at each individual target, how many times he was targeted, the teams, the schemes he's playing against and all, and all like that. I don't find it as a lot of noise in there.
Yeah, and interception numbers, they can be a bit noisy in terms of, a couple of lucky bounces your way can create interceptions and all that. And, I was trying to see how many Sauce Gardner had in his career. He did have 9. He had 3 each season, his 3 years with Cincinnati, because it's the profile of kind of a boundary type corner that locked things down on one side in college. I do want to note here, by the way, just saw a tweet of Keanu Benton's Instagram story, this visit we just talked about, but Benton officially in Pittsburgh today. So we know that Keanu Benton has his top 30 with the Steelers on Monday.
Okay.
All right. Mentioning a moment ago about the 5th-year option in terms of first-round picks, Pittsburgh has no decision to make this year, correct, Dave?
None, right. And that's a result of them, trading away that first-round pick for Minkah Fitzpatrick a couple of years ago. So no 5th-year option decision for the Steelers this year. So that now forwards us into looking ahead and speculating about Najee Harris a year from now and whether or not the team will pick up his 5th-year option. And, a lot of things can obviously change in a year's time, right? And but from where we sit right now today, you'd have to like the odds of them picking up that 5th-year option, right?
Yeah, I do as well. Just given the offensive identity, and as you said, a year is an eternity in the NFL, and our whole mindset and discussion could be 100% yes or 100% no based on what happens in 2023. But as we sit here today, I will venture a guess and say they will pick it up.
I guess where it would become a little bit more of a discussion on the Steelers' end here is because, look, right now, Najee has 1 pro because they tier this thing now, right? With play time, there's different levels of what the 5th-year option amount could be. There's a play time level, and then there's a one-time Pro Bowler level, and then there's a multiple time Pro Bowl level as well too. As of right now, it looks like Najee's certainly on course to hit the playtime level amount of a 5th-year option. He does have the 1 Pro Bowl, obviously, right now, but that was not an original ballot selection, so that won't count. But there is the 2023 season yet to go, so he could obviously be an original ballot Pro Bowl selection for 2023, and then that would bump him up to that middle level, which I believe would be the transition tag amount for whatever it is for a running back next year, which I envision probably being somewhere, I don't know, about $9 or $10 million. Now, once you pick up that 5th-year option these days, now it becomes fully guaranteed. Now, this would be for the 2025 season. Yeah. Right? When it comes to that, but it would be fully guaranteed, it wouldn't be something that you have to worry about, swallowing in 2024. That said, his 2024 salary is fully guaranteed as part of his rookie agreement that he had there. So the only way I think it really becomes an interesting discussion with Najee Harris a year from now is if, some sort of unfortunate injury that cost him a lot of the year, or just really, really, really a poor performance by him in 2023 as a whole. Mm-hmm. So I think it'd be some of those things that it would be easy to form a discussion around if some of those unfortunate things were to happen with him.
Right. And that is one relatively new change the NFL made, because it used to be the fifth-year option was not guaranteed. So there really wasn't much risk in picking it up unless it was an obvious player and you just kind of felt like it'd be a slap in the face to do so. You could pick it up and then just rescind it if the player didn't work out. You didn't want to pay that tag. Now it is, you got to commit to that the second that you place it. So it's a heavier discussion to have. But again, I'm in agreement with you as we sit here today. I think they will pick it up on Harris.
And here's something in the research that I did for that post, since 2011, when that class was the first class that because of the new CBA at the time, became the class that, technically the fifth-year option started on up until the 2019 class, because this offseason we're dealing with the 2020 class. Is where the decisions are formulated around this offseason when it comes to fifth-year option. So I looked at previous history from 2011 class to 2019 class. There were 13 total running backs who were selected in the first round during those years. Of those 13, only 4 of them, Melvin Gordon, Todd Gurley, Ezekiel Elliott, and Saquon Barkley, ultimately had their fifth-year options exercise. Now there's an asterisk player within there. You might as well add him as as a fifth of those 13. And that was Christian McCaffrey, because they worked out a long-term deal with him prior to the decision date on this fifth-year option. So, he deserves to be included in that list there as 5 of the 13. So a little less than 50% overall of those 13 running backs, you could say had their fifth-year option exercise. Obviously, McCaffrey got a deal and didn't have to get to the fifth-year option deadline date there. People will say, well, can the Steelers extend the contract, sign Najee to a contract extension next offseason before they get to the decision date on the fifth-year option? I mean, nothing would prevent them from doing it, but it would be significant in the fact of the historical aspect of the Steelers doing something like that.
Yeah, and just given the nature of the running back position, don't commit until you have to. And even then, there's obviously the big thought of don't commit ever. 5 years, replace him and then start with a new guy. So, the second running back contracts historically have not looked good. That's obviously a pretty low success rate in terms of fifth-year options or something equivalent even being exercised. I do wonder where that stacks up to other positions just to get the number relative, but I imagine running back being sub 50% is going to be lower than virtually any other position group.
Okay.
So, that's a good thought. And that's the reason why some people kind of rail against running backs in the first round. I know you're not a big fan of the idea, but that's where Pittsburgh's at. And, we'll just see how 2023 goes and take it from there.
Yeah, look, I mean, my thoughts on taking a running back in the first round aside, if you did end up doing that, which the Steelers did, I would hope at least you got a fifth year out of him.
Yeah, that was kind of the thought that we had when they drafted him, because he was a bit older, 5 years, if you get 5 good years out of him, you're pretty happy with the pick overall. And if you have to move on, then you have to move on. Obviously we're still a ways away from all those discussions, but if that's what ends up happening, then I'm good with it.
Okay.
I do want to mention just really briefly, because I was watching a running back last night for one of my upcoming player profiles. I mean, I very much doubt he'll become a Steeler, but I kind of, in just a very selfish sense, want him to become a Steeler. Roschon Johnson from Texas. Everyone talks about the top Longhorn running back in Bijan Robinson, but to me, Roschon Johnson is a lot of fun to watch. Super physical, downhill bruiser, special teams value, completely selfless type of dude, good pass protector. Just really like this guy overall. And he was a great athlete coming out, high school quarterback. That was just an insane player. So, again, he's very unlikely to go to Pittsburgh, although Merrill Hodge was at the Texas Pro Day to scout him. But I just want to shout out Roschon Johnson. He might be a steal in this draft.
All right. And I guess that kind of was some of your reason to write up, don't totally discount the position. Hear me out, right?
They didn't hear me out. That was not heard out. That's the idea was, and I wrote that, I think, on Saturday. I think Jonathan Heitritter kind of agreed with the thought as well. Because Pittsburgh is shifting into this run-heavy offense, you need to have really quality running back depth. It's not like where you can put everything on, prime Ben Roethlisberger on his shoulders and ask him to throw the ball 50 times a game, and you can kind of work with that overall. And so, when I suggest drafting a running back, it would not be until very late. As of right now, we're talking 7th round, but you're lacking that number 3 running back. And if something happens to Najee Harris or Jalen Warren, certainly possible over the course of a long 17-game season, kind of what the committee approach that Pittsburgh has, you want to have good quality depth there. Just in the way that if you're a pass-happy team, you better have good receiver depth when somebody goes down so you don't really have to shift what you want your offense to look like. So I know that idea is not popular, but I think it makes sense based on the transition and identity that Pittsburgh is trying to build.
Well, my hope is that we're not talking about a drafted running back. I'll put that out there.
But don't you, does the point land, though, in the sense of if this is going to be a run-heavy team, you can't afford to lose running backs and then have your offense try to shift mid-season?
I see where you're coming from, but we're talking about, a third running back on the depth chart,
Right, but he could become number 2 in an instant, and right now it's not the workhorse position. Just go get a couple of undrafted guys and figure it out. Plus, don't you have Master Teague back on the off-season roster and all as well too? I just would, unless they pick up, a couple extra picks through maybe a trade down scenario in here. If they wind up sitting with the picks they have currently, or just, as a result of a trade still end up with 7 picks overall, I would hope that they wouldn't. At least that's my hope. Okay, yeah, fair enough. It's just an idea that I kind of had kicking around just because of the way that Pittsburgh is shifting their offensive focus.
He damn sure better be able to play special teams.
Yeah, and again, Roschon Johnson is not going to be a late round pick, but Roschon Johnson is probably one of the best teams guys in this draft. He had 8 tackles last year. There's a clip I have in my report that'll get posted in a couple of days of him just lighting up a dude on the kick coverage team. So I love this guy. I think he got, he was hidden behind some of the running backs that Texas had. This guy is going to be a really good NFL player.
Okay.
All right, did you an article on, I think, Saturday as well about some XFL candidates. We were looking at this league, just for something to kind of kill time during the offseason, but also potentially for the NFL to pick up some of these players once the XFL and those leagues have their seasons wind down later this year. So talk about what you kind of wanted to get the point across in that article.
Well, here we are now on April the 3rd, and this team still only has 3 tackles under contract. They did bring in, obviously, Joshua Miles for a workout a couple of days after they had signed LaRaven Clark. He left town unsigned and has since signed with the Atlanta Falcons. You look at his arm length. You look at LaRaven Clark's arm length. You look at obviously, the other 2 they have under contract, and you just look at the decision to bring in Joshua Miles alone. It leads you to believe that this team, will still, regardless of what happens in the draft, that this team will still potentially sign at least one more tackle either before the draft or after the draft. Now you still got a few more weeks to go in the XFL season. And yes, there are if you look at specifically current free agent tackles still on the market right now who are 31 years of age and under, who have at least 34-inch arms, it's a short list at this point, right?
Yeah, you probably know it better than I do, but I imagine there aren't many of those players, or at least guys that have some sort of an NFL resume. There may be some guy that's been on practice squads and, clear journeyman, but At this point, with a scarcity of tackles to begin with, even at the start of free agency, I doubt there are many great names out there right now.
Yeah, there really aren't at this point right now, and that's Cedric Aboye and a few others out there. Where's my list specifically here? Where'd it go? I can't find it. George Fant was on that list, I remember.
Okay.
But overall, that list isn't looking great at all right now.
Right. So, who was the XFL guy that you had suggested? I think he was a local.
Yeah, he's actually a Pitt product as well too. What was the kid's name? Jared Jones Smith out of the University of Pittsburgh. He was the kid that he played much more in his last year at Pitt, which ended up being, I think, Kenny Pickett's first year there. He's the one that had the knee injury during his career at Pitt, was able to ultimately bounce back from that. But of the way I came across him is I was looking at the PFF grades, Pro Football Focus grades on some of these tackles this year, and specifically looking for one with long arms. And lo and behold, I quickly came across the name of Jared Jones Smith. He's got some long arms. He's actually entered this weekend as the top run blocking tackle in the XFL and the 6th overall graded tackle overall. So that, and obviously seeing his, being a Pittsburgh product caused me to go down that rabbit hole with him. I think at some point they're going to look strong at some of these not just tackles, but XFL products overall, and I think Jones Smith could be a guy that they potentially look at here.
Yeah, I love the suggestion. I think it's a great one overall. He's got that connection. I know it's super kind of light, but what was the connection there? His offensive line coach was Pat. How do you say the last name? Perlis, who's the son of Steelers, great defensive line coach George Perlis. So that was really cool overall. And so, yeah, I think, the Steelers, the NFL at large will look at some of these XFL guys, and I think tackle is one thing to look at. I think that Jones Smith checks those boxes. I think quarterback as well. This team's going to add 2 more arms before they go to training camp this summer in late July. And so I think they could either draft somebody late or an undrafted free agent plus an XFL or one of these other league quarterbacks that get added here to round out Pittsburgh's quarterback depth chart.
Yeah, that's a great point about the quarterbacks as well, too. And I think somebody hit on that in the comments of that post as well, too.
Okay, I don't know the name right now in terms of who that guy could be. I haven't done any research on that, but
could it be an AJ McCarron or somebody like that? Or you think another team? Look, there's going to be several of these guys come out, right? That end up on NFL teams.
Yeah, I think an AJ McCarron, somebody that has some NFL experience, probably they want as a number 3 to have in camp to start. So, yeah, it could be him. I think Ben DiNucci's in one of these leagues right now. And I'm also just, to go back to Jared Jones Smith, I didn't realize this. I'm kind of rereading through the article. Bruce Gradkowski's the OC with the Battle Hawks, which is a obviously great Pittsburgh Steelers connection there.
Yeah, they need to add some tackles regardless of what they do in the draft. So, and once again, I didn't go deep down this list. I was just looking, it was more of a Blues Clues. I'm looking for maybe a top tackle here that's played some left tackle in the XFL that has maybe a tiny bit of roster experience. And really Jones Smith has really been a practice squad player since he came out, but he was a combine guy overall, and actually put up, some decent, I think overall agility numbers at the combine as well too. He's only played just 4 snaps or something like that in the NFL the last couple of years there. So there's nothing really to go on there. But I was just trying to find a guy that might interest the Steelers, and obviously with the Pittsburgh connection and Gradkowski and the long arms and him being grading out as a top 10 tackle in the PFF rankings to date. I didn't look any. I had my subject matter at that point there. So it doesn't mean that will be the only guy. I just think that you could see this team sign a tackle, coming out of the XFL with him potentially leading the list of candidates.
Yeah, I think they will be adding with some sort of tackle that has some sort of experience, professionally. I think Jared Jones-Smith is an excellent pull and a great job by you to break that down. And it would not shock me if he actually ended up being the guy that Pittsburgh signed later this year.
Right.
All right, Dave, anything else, or do you want to get to some reader emails and close out today's show?
Yeah, I think we've hit a pretty good for not being in, and tell people what we got going on tonight. Not a live stream, right?
Yep, another Steelers Depot Q&A live stream on my YouTube channel. Just search the name Alex Kozora, 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Dave and I answering as many of your Steelers questions as we can.
Let's see. Antonio Frazier writes in, love the show, longtime listener. Who would know what to do without you delivering the Steelers news? I think with all the free agent signing, the Steelers probably jump in the draft to take one of the top tackles. They have basically secured a lot of the holes, and I think having 17 and one of the seconds, most likely number 49, they can jump up to grab a starting left tackle. He writes, let me know what you guys think about that move. As always, thanks guys so much for all that you do and covering the team. Look, Antonio, I think we talked the other day, if at least my view on this is, if they were to move up at all in the first round of the 2023 draft, I would envision them moving up maybe a couple of spots to take a tackle. And I would think that it would probably be on sites to maybe get a Paris Johnson because of his history, his pedigree, the amount of games that he played in college and all like that. Other people will say, well, Jalen Clark, I don't know if you want to trade up to get a Jalen Carter. Especially with kind of the baggage that seems to be circulating around him right now. Overall, he's a very, very talented player without a doubt. But I don't know how much, this pre-draft process is maybe hurt him, and specifically when it comes to maybe teams trading up to get him as well too. I would think if they did move up, it would be to get a guy that could potentially be their new starting left tackle.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think we had this conversation on the last podcast. If they do trade up, and it's always impossible to project based on the board offers, all those caveats that we like to place, but it would almost certainly be for a tackle. And I think Paris Johnson could even be basically off the table because he might end up going top 7, top 8 overall. He's going to be the first tackle off the board, so it might be too rich to do that. But it would be somebody like him, or maybe more realistically, a Broderick Jones from Georgia, where you go up, say, 3 to 5 spots to get him if they were to make that kind of move. Those are the guys they would go after.
We're asked early on in this process and could we see what's more likely to happen? Trade up, trade down, especially when it comes to first round, all those kind of questions. I feel a little bit more, confident at this time in my thinking now. If they were to trade at all in the first round, it would more likely be down rather than up.
Okay, I'm the opposite. I think it'll be up than down. If you're trading down, you're sitting there, you got pick 32, you got pick 49. What else are you trying to get? If you were to trade down in the first round, I think if anything, they would go up.
Okay. We'll be in disagreement there. Jay Guilford writes in, hello, Dave and Alex. I know the Steelers signed 2 inside linebackers in free agency, but it still feels like there's room to add a premium long-term talent there. He says, I'm not asking for a prediction, but rather your preference. I trust the work you and the Depot crew put into draft analysis. If you could choose one inside linebacker to draft, regardless of draft slot, who would it be and why? And he asked, does Nolan Smith count more as an edge, or could you project him moving inside at the next level? Thanks for all you do. Keep up the great work. Yeah, Nolan Smith's going to be an interesting conversation and has been because of him being undersized at Georgia. However, him being productive off the edge there. I know some people say, well, there's no way he'd be able to survive as a true edge guy at the NFL level. He'd have to move off the ball, at the NFL level. I guess overall, who is a guy that, regardless of draft slot, inside linebacker, I mean, you're a big Jack Campbell fan.
Mm-hmm.
I obviously like his tape as well too. I think you're a little bit higher on him than I am. But if they were to go at a potential impact guy right away early in this draft, I would think it would be Jack Campbell, right?
Is that your top preference? If you could choose any off-ball linebacker? Because I would go Jack Campbell, yes.
Well, he's talking about, somebody, if you're talking about somebody that could come in right away, I don't think it could be anybody other here. Look, you got the Sanders kid out of Arkansas, but he's a converted edge with 1 year off the ball experience, right? So there's more of a transition element, I think, to him, where I don't think you could definitively say, well, if we got this guy early, he could slide right in there and be an instant impact guy. And I think the key part of this question, it would be more of a kind of an instant impact guy.
Yeah, but there's also Trenton Simpson. Now there's a question about exactly where he fits, but those are kind of the viewed as the top off-ball linebackers. I would choose Campbell into the question of, does it feel like that room is still lacking to a degree? And I'm just, at some point you got to draft a guy and really invest in that sense of things, because the free agency route has been so poor and just so never ending. And I understand the draft's no guarantee, and Devin Bush was a big whiff and all that stuff, but at some point, you got to go back to the draft as opposed to just trying to sign veteran free agents every single year, which is essentially what they've done for the last, 3, 4, 5 years.
And look, the most intriguing potential guy, not first or second round, I think maybe that you could add in this. That'll be interesting to watch where he goes and how he's used, would be the Nick Herbig kid, because he's more to a mid to later round guy. He was an edge at Wisconsin, good production there, but there's been all that talk about he's probably going to have to move to off the ball at the NFL level. And then there's the whole, bloodline thing going back to the Steelers there. So not necessarily a guy that you would qualify as saying, well, you get him and he's an instant impact guy, but could he potentially be a guy the Steelers look at that, not get in a hurry with, that maybe could wind up being, having a inside linebacker role with the Steelers of some way, shape, or form.
With Herbig, yeah, he feels like a Steelers guy. Can play the edge. I think he'll fit well off ball, aggressive. I think he'll be a good special teams player. And obviously the relationship there, being the brother of Nate Herbig, and Pittsburgh loves their Hawaiians. I had the article over the weekend too, that of the nine Hawaii-born players on rosters right now, Pittsburgh has 3 of them. So go out a 4th, I guess.
Okay. Finn from overseas writes in. Finn from Ireland here. Long time, second time. Thanks for all the great work you do. He says, I have 2 questions. When teams keep restructuring a contract every year, my understanding is the dead cap for the remaining years for the bonus is compounding. And he has parentheses, the original prorated dead cap plus the new bonus prorated dead cap. Is there a way of avoiding this, or do they eventually just eat the dead cap? He says, do you think, so let's answer that first portion. I think kind of the way you described it here is correct overall. Look, in the year where the proration is of a signing bonus, that does not move. But let's say if you did restructure a guy year to year, yeah, you're adding on to whatever proration is on that year. So I guess you could say it does stack up there. You cannot move the proration from one, it has to be stacked like that on top of previous proration, depending on the year, obviously, where you do the restructure at. So I think the way you described it in your head here is technically correct here. But you asked, is there a way of avoiding eating dead cap? Well, the hope is that you do, when you do these restructures, you hope that the player just plays out the final year of his contract. Now, obviously, let's say you did do a guy in multiple years of back-to-back, let's say, restructures. Whatever the final year of that deal is, has a fairly significant cap hit because there is a lot of restructure money in there. But the hope and the reason you do these restructures on the guys that you do the restructures on is that you're hoping when you get them to that final year, they just play out that final year, or you do another extension, which lowers the base salary in that final year, which helps offset those previous restructures as well.
Right. So is it unfair? Is it incorrect to say eventually you have to reckon with your can kicking, or can you feel like you can still work around it if everything kind of breaks perfectly for you?
Well, look, I mean, the proration is the proration. You still, because it's raising a player's cap hit, you still have to work around that aspect of the original, whatever year you're talking about, the final year, whether it be fourth or fifth or whatever, however long the contract was for originally there, assuming you're not adding void years to it. I mean, there's an element that you still have to project around because you're raising the player's cap charge through these prorations, but you're still you got to eat that bonus proration at some point. You're just choosing to eat it later than earlier.
Right. And I guess the other thought is the cap will continue to go up and it'll be a smaller percentage of that money 3 years from now.
Yeah. And the other element, as I mentioned there, as you get to that final year there, maybe you're extending the player again. And then say that player has, as part of that cap charge, like a $13 million base salary. Well, as part of the extension, you're going to work down that final year of that soon to be expiring contract. You're going to work down that cap charge of that year through part of the extension, but the proration money still stays in the year that it was prorated to.
Can I ask you just a really random but semi-related question and just want to get your thoughts on it, Dave, about the cap? What would the NFL look like if there was no salary cap? What kind of impacts would there be? I mean, it's probably impossible to answer. You can go in a million different ways to try to answer that question, but would the league be better or worse off if there was no salary cap, similar to baseball?
Well, you just have the teams that want to go out and buy. So I don't think not having a salary cap in football would severely hamper the smaller, I'm assuming you'd still have the revenue share and all like that, but you'd still have the deep pocket owners who would be willing to go out and just spend crazy money because they would not have to deal with the cap aspect of it, potentially trying to buy championships every year.
All right. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. That's basically what's happening in baseball right now. Just wanted to get your quick thoughts on that.
Yeah. I mean, now look, I don't understand the whole process of Major League Baseball and all, but it does seem like the teams with the money go get the star players, right?
Yeah. The Dodgers versus the Pirates or the Athletics, for example. Also, another question, and this is more of a fact-based thing. When did the salary cap start in the NFL? I assume there was no salary cap in 1933, but when did that get instituted? Was there a reason that pushed them to go to that, or just the league realized we were getting so big, we kind of have to maybe have some parameters here? But I mean, free agency wasn't a thing in the 80s, so it wasn't like you were buying players back in the 80s.
Well, I think free agency started the talks. Once free agency started coming into vogue, I think that started, the talk of salary cap and all like that. I don't remember the exact process of it. You'd have to go back and read a lot of the old newspaper articles, I would imagine, within that. But, because it used to be you players, you just owned the rights to players, right?
Right. And I know that there's probably some free agency in the 80s, but like Reggie White, I guess in the early 90s was kind of the start when the NFL really instituted free agency. I just was curious on the history of it, if there was a reason, something that occurred for the NFL to say, okay, we have to change the system, or just kind of a natural progression as the league got bigger and bigger, or what the roots were of the salary cap in terms of the NFL's history.
Yeah. First introduced in 1994. That's right.
Okay, yeah, so it was with like the Reggie White and all that. Yeah, what was the cap in '94? Is there a number on that, like 50 million or something? I don't know. What's crazy crazy number it would have been back then?
Let's see if we can find out here. The cap was first introduced in '94, was expected to be $32 million, but an unexpectedly high bid from Fox and other networks increased the cap to $34.6 million in 1994.
And now that gets you not even Daniel Jones at this point. Crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy how it escalates and has escalated there.
All right. Anything else from the emo machine?
No, I think we got most of them out of the way there.
All right, good deal. So yeah, Dave and I will have the live stream tonight, 7 p.m. Eastern time for an hour, and we'll come back on Wednesday.
All right. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at Steelers Depot. Follow Alex on Twitter at Alex_Kozora. Follow the show at Terrible Podcast. Email the show, theterriblepodcast@gmail.com. If you like what we do and want to donate to the cause, go to SteelersDepot.com. Hit the donate button, upper right navigational bar. Also, if you like an ad-free version of the site, go to SteelersDepot.com. Hit the ad-free button, upper right navigational bar, and follow the directions that way. We'll be back on Wednesday talking about something. Maybe they'll have a couple of these new signings in, doing some interviews with those guys or whatnot, but we'll figure out something. And additionally, like we said, we hope we'll have a roundtable discussion later this week in an episode of the podcast. So as always, thanks for listening to the Terrible Podcast with Dave and Alex.